Sorry about that, slight technical glitch on the cameras, just to enhance my nerves. So thanks for joining us, hope you're all having a good day. I'm going to cover off some of what I hope is going to be some ideas for you to take away for your senior hiring executive search. So I'll explain a little bit about who I am, what I do, cover off a little bit around what various ideas are around what in-house exec search does, and then we'll really dig into some of the various things that hopefully will allow you to take something away that's specific for you and your business where you can innovate. So a little bit about me. That's a much younger and happier version of me. So it was taken about 10 years ago in Australia when I worked out there. I currently work for BT. I've been there about 4 years and I lead the in-house executive search function. Prior to that I was at PwC and Accenture, and before that I spent 10 years at an executive search firm, since working around the world. Now I've got a couple of bullet points on here because to make the move across from search firm into in-house, sometimes people question why. And one of the things that really sticks with me through my career is someone once said to me, and they were a HR leader of a FTSE 100 business, said you cannot innovate for an in-house recruitment. And I kind of sat there and thought, God, then what are we here for? Are we here just for transactional, just order taking? And I got to think, well, how do we change that? How do we actually get this perception to change? And I don't think there's any, I think there's a direct correlation between the enhancement of HR overall and the growth of in-house recruitment and the growth of in-house exec search. So I'm going to dig into some of what, oh God, this goes miles, sorry. So I'm going to dig into some of what executive search functions do now, because it feels as though it's an area that's really been growing. There are some functions that have been established for a pretty long time, so 10 years and more, and then there are functions like mine that have only been going sort of 3 or 4 years. And the reason for that is because there are different philosophies from the HR leaders, there are different philosophies from people that do my role, into exactly what an in-house exec search function should do. Some of them are just doing purely direct source products, so they are replacing external search firms, which is certainly part of what we do, but not entirely. Others are much more of an advisory function, so they will come in and they'll talk to you about, great, what's the best route to market? What's the best supplier that you should use? And doing a lot of things that a good search firm would do without actually doing the operational piece. Some of it, and I imagine for all of us in this room, the experience of the candidate at the senior level is something that is paramount importance. So actually some teams focus on purely making sure, especially in the larger corporates, that the experience is good. Because sometimes navigating the various parts of the business can be quite difficult, and there's actually real value in that. Some functions are supplier-led, so search firm-led. I would say our current split is probably about 75-25 towards using suppliers, so using search firms. Now that's decreased over the past couple of years as we've really built up our function. We've also built out what we've been doing over 3 years. So if you were to ask us to look for a corporate affairs director, 2.5 years ago we would have known where to go. Whereas now we've done some work in that space, we have something we can build off. So we're better positioned to do it ourselves as opposed to go to a search firm. Some of the pharmaceutical companies just have talent scouting. So they are separate from the talent acquisition function completely. They report into strategy, and what they tend to do is work on up to 12 critically important roles to that business. So that could be succession planning, it could be skills gap, it could be anything that company has decided that there is a real gap, and all that function will do. And some of them are sizable. In some of the larger pharmas, you're talking worldwide, a dozen or so people just doing talent scouting, which for those of us from a search background would just look at that as research, in essence. Strategically aligned workload, so everyone talks about getting more proactive. How are we going to improve talent acquisition? Let's get more proactive. Really difficult to do because workforce planning in the 3 places that I've worked changes on a weekly basis, and you only have your meetings quarterly, so you do the math on that one. And I think one of the real core points around the difference between one in-house exec search function to another is the levels that they operate. So for example, we're doing some board work, so some independent non-exec director work at the moment. We've done some executive committee work, but some businesses the function doesn't actually look after that. They look after the layers below the exec committee. So those that are reporting into the CFO and the CEO and what have you. Again, really depends on the philosophy. That's where it comes from. So the reason I really wanted to just get that across to you is because when we start digging into where we can innovate, it really depends on what your function does and how it's set up as to actually what things you should potentially look to innovate. Right. So, why are in-house exec search functions growing? I mentioned earlier the HR is more of a voice now, and I think actually HR is evolving the way that it strategically aligns with the business. So I think there is a lot more knowledge around what they want, what a buyer wants from us, what do our clients actually look for. They're more demanding now, and actually in the larger corporates, talent acquisition functions are slammed ordinarily anyway. They've got so much to do that actually to ask for a white glove executive service on top of that is quite a big ask. So I think that's why there is a separate team now in a lot of organisations where it's just focused on, depending on how you define executive search. Is it down to cost? Some areas it's down to cost. Sure. I mean, one search could cost you £150,000, and then all of a sudden you're looking at doing 10 of those over a year. It's a significant saving. So, however, if you were to ask the actual buyers, so the CEO, the CFO, do they really care about the fee? Not really. I think a lot of them are really looking at making sure they get the best possible person, and that's why search has continued. If you look at the growth of the revenues of the tier 1 search firms, of the Shrek firms, that has continued to grow over the last 7 years, year on year. Now bear in mind that coincides with the growth of in-house exec search functions. That tells you there's a lot of work out there, and it's not that the in-house search functions are taking it away from search firms, it just might be that they're operating at different levels. So again, something to be thinking about. I think a lot of where we are heading is that in-house can do parts of the exec search process much better. And that's because we're really in tune with the business. If you're sat with that exec committee, if you understand the strategy, if you understand where the skill gaps are, or where the gaps are in succession, because we understand the business, you could argue better, we should be able to position it in the market slightly better. So with that overall, let's dig into innovation, because that's why we're here, and that's what we want to look at. How do we improve senior hiring in-house? When I go back to that HR that said you cannot innovate, I kind of sat back and thought, well, really we should start with a definition of what innovation is, and I kind of racked my brain. That's the dictionary definition. My definition is, again, along those lines. I think it's just about making change for the better and adding value. I think that's what we should be doing. On the simplest level, is there something that in your current team or process or approach that you can change that will make it better and more valuable to your business? So on that premise, if it doesn't stick on too far, I've got a few things that we can dig into in each one, and a few examples. So, total talent. By way of a show of hands, how many people have heard of the concept of total talent? Fine. The idea, it's a relatively new thought process, and it's all around the different ways and types of working. So the gig economy people talk about, there's different ways that we can hire people now. And we talk about all these different generations coming into the workplace and not wanting to all be permanent people. So total talent is about actually being able to manage the workload in a more agile way. So do you need all of that full-time headcount? Can you work in a much more let's say agile contract type project-based approach? Now that is incredibly interesting when you look at someone like BT who's gone through a huge transformation. We're looking at different geographies, we're looking at different levels, things are moving all the time. So you would argue that actually bringing people in, even at an exec level, is, on a full-time contract, so as a permanent employee, ethically isn't a great thing to do, because in 6 months' time and 18 months' time, that role might not exist due to the change in the organisation. So total talent is, and I think actually total talent will go beyond that into actually bringing in the various aspects of reward, workforce planning, assessment. All of these things will come in and be a true total talent approach. We're miles off of that, nobody does it yet. There are some organisations that are leading the way. The names won't be a surprise to you when you look at the likes of Microsoft and some of the bigger players. But I think it's something that if you have an established in-house exec search function, we should be looking at how do we then build our bridges with other areas of talent acquisition. So that's the top end of your professional hiring, it's your contract hiring and your short-term hiring, and could even be looking at your strategy where people are looking at interim body shopping type solutions, because you need leaders in that side of space. So it's quite advanced, as I say, nobody really does it yet, but that could be something if you have an established function you might want to explore slightly more. Nobody will be surprised to see assessment up here. Assessment is a hot topic, possibly because, and we'll come on to identification, people talk about identification as it's becoming a lot easier. Don't you just go on LinkedIn and find people? Well, that's fine, but how do you know those people are any good? And actually, this is where assessment, and I've listed a load of various things that you can assess people on. There's no silver bullet when it comes to assessment. So you might use Hogan, you might use Darkside, you might use Korn Ferry, which does a lot of the abstract thinking type piece, SHL. Lots of different types of assessments you can put people through. But not one of them can be used in a foolproof way in every one of our organisations. That does not exist. So in my mind, I think assessment is something that should be bespoke to your organisation. You could use a plethora of these things, but there are bits in the background where you really need to understand your culture, you really need to understand your business, that you can build a bespoke assessment process, possibly as far as going down into the vertical markets. So do you want your HR leader to have a lot of EQ? Absolutely, because they're representing the people. Do you want them to be, the best abstract thinker? Yeah, you want them to be a problem solver. There are certain things where you can tick boxes on them, but that doesn't mean that when they land they're going to be a success. So Spencer Stuart have just introduced a cultural assessment. They bought a Chinese firm. And effectively, I don't know if anyone's ever done insights, but it tells you whether your organisation is slightly more innovative or whether it's a little more staid and secure and that type of thinking. And again, what we're trying to get behind here is there isn't one assessment that you can put into play. What we should be looking at is various elements of assessment that we can then break into really understanding the person, what sort of environment do they work best in, what are their gaps, where can we help develop them, where can we take them. So assessment is something that is a little bit of a minefield, but in terms of innovation, it's right that people are already looking at it. Not just for your exec, so again, at BT we're looking at how do we do that for our professional hiring as well, because a lot of time people they'll use one of these assessments and just go, great, that's our exec, and they'll forget about our future exec population, which might be your 80 to 120 population in terms of base salary. Well, surely we should be mapping them across in our succession planning as well. But not a lot of places do that. Again, is that innovative? Maybe not, maybe that's just progressive, but I think if you created your own assessment, that's innovative, because it's bespoke to you, and it really, you can track how good that is and how well it would actually work. Mentioned strategically aligned earlier, workforce planning. I always laugh when I think of that, because I do think of management consulting when you don't really know what projects you're going to win. So you don't really know what you're going to need to bring into the business. Workforce planning is, again, I think something where we can get closer to the business. Again, maybe not innovative, but I do think it's something that we could improve and work closer with OD, org effectiveness, a lot of these areas where we get closer to the business to understand skills gap analysis, where are the skills that we're lacking, and succession planning, where are those huge gaps where we can go out and do some talent scouting. Talent scouting is one of those things that I don't think should be done in isolation. That should be part of your executive search to this job. Identification, I touched on, LinkedIn. Technology has made identification a commodity. So we can go out and we can find people, no problem. Well, I say that, we can find the low-hanging fruit, no problem. Actually, the difficulty comes in when your hiring manager says, go and get me somebody from Google, which they invariably do, and then you go, you don't want somebody from Google, okay? You might want somebody that can work in that environment or is innovative. You need to get beneath what you're looking for. And then the identification trick comes in, well, what happens to the person that started at Google, that then went over to the Philippines and worked for some abstract startup, and then has come back to work for an accelerator that nobody's actually heard of yet? Well, how do you track them? That's identification. And identification is something that is part of the reason I think traditional search is now dead. So the idea of trying to do a search over 3 months is a terrible concept. Very few places do it anymore. Those that do invariably are not always happy with their results. Identification should be, thinking back up to that strategically aligned, great, let us know what's coming up. Let's look at the OD, let's mark who we think is potentially red being a warning sign, whether that's a flight risk or somebody we're not happy with their performance, and let's get to work at identification. And over 12 months, it gives you the time to really dig internationally, and not just after their names and their profiles, get to know them. The concept of hiring talent and talent hires, meaning that you hire them into roles that don't exist, or you hire them into roles with an idea of succession planning them into other roles in future. Difficult to manage, and you really need to make sure your assessment is right, that they are those right people. You don't waste those spots. But by way of example, that's something we want to do at BT. We've just done our first talent hire, which, quite frankly, I can't stand it. But you look at it and go, actually, that's a sign of a change where we are. They are actually starting to look at talent in a slightly different way. And they say, do you know what, we find good people, and we can use them, and we think they're our future leaders, then besides the transformation that we're doing, let's bring them in, let's test them out, and then we can put them into those roles that we think they're going to go for. Identification has gone through innovation. Technology has done that. What I would want my team to do and what I like to do is always challenge and say to our HR leaders, to say to our business, great, yes, we can identify them, but how do we make sure we identify the right people? And how do we make sure we have enough time to make sure we do a thorough identification search in the first place? Not just a periphery look on LinkedIn that comes back after a week. That's the difference. Search firms. So I mentioned we're probably 75% reliant on search firms now. But what's interesting is, if you look at, they're called the Shrek firms, I don't like being called the Shrek firms, but those tier ones that everyone knows of from their brand, and your CEO will go, we need to go and use Russell Reynolds because they're Russell Reynolds. That hasn't gone away, but interestingly, they're still changing their model because they don't believe that traditional search, operational search, transactional search, they don't think that's the best way to do it anymore. So you'll see, certainly 4, if not all of the Shrek firms have split their businesses into executive search and advisory. Now, the revenues on advisory on some of those firms have gone through the roof. And advisory, I think it's because no longer can they come in, sit down and really challenge around what the brief is, and then rock up with a shortlist 6 weeks later. What we expect now as a buyer is an advisory for you to come in. If you're a search buyer, I need to know that you are a specialist in that industry, in that discipline, and that you know those people inside and out, because I want to reach them quick. You usually use a search firm because you are a bit short on time. That's why the reason you pay them now. And if they can't do that, if they can't advise you, then you should really be questioning why you're using them. And not all of the search firms, interestingly, they all split by vertical alignment, so they're split by industry, effectively. Now, if you've got a diversity and inclusion lens, and you want to go across a particular area and get across all those industries, then you need to know how those search firms work, because otherwise you are only going to get 10% visibility, probably just across that particular vertical industry. Again, they are changing the way that they operate because the buyers are becoming more sophisticated. The buyers are challenging them and saying, well, I understand that I'm in financial services, but actually the person might come from technology. And how do I get visibility for those people? It's those type of questions that I think will continue to make those search firms evolve the way they work. Interestingly, they also have tried over the past few years different pricing models. One of my current leaders actually said to me, the Shrek firms don't negotiate on fees. And you kind of sit there and think, no, you're making my life very easy, because obviously they would do. But what's interesting is, again, when you bring back to the money point of view, money cost is not the main driver of search. So even though they've played with that, actually what really gets into the detail, Spencer Stewart and their cultural assessment, yeah, great, show us something that de-risks our hire, that makes us feel more comfortable that we found the right person. And that's that level of advisory and assessment that they can do. I could talk about search firms and the way we've certainly tried to morph the way we've worked with them, but we've only got 20 minutes, so I will move on. What is the right route to market? So historically, as a listed business, it's a little bit like using an auditor. It's like using one of the big four. If you want to go and look for a new CEO, you need to go and use one of the big search firms because nobody got fired for those. And also there comes a level of expectation that they've delivered. Actually, it's not always the right route to market. There are so many different alternatives now. Some are technology, some are just cheaper, smaller businesses, boutique search firms. So I thought I'd just run through what the various search firms and types of search firm are, and then we'll run through some of the newer technology examples that we've used recently. So, different types of search firm. Board level search. So, would you differentiate board level from Shrek firm? Yes. So, if you're going out and you're going to go and do a non-exec director role, you would not use Russell Reynolds. Why? Because they're not a board level search practice. They're an exec committee level search practice. Lots of change in that world. So Zygos was bought by Russell Reynolds, JCA was purchased by Heidrick & Struggles. There's lots of movement in there as those Shrek firms try to bolster their search practice in that level. Why? Because board level has been absolutely disrupted. Some of you might be aware of a company called New Role, which is effectively advertising for well, they say it's for exec search, but in essence their real hit is the board level search. Also with internal, so non-exec directors for us, for example, need to have fibre rollout. Now there are only so many people that have done fibre rollout because it's brand new, and actually, luckily, the UK is quite far behind, so we can go internationally. But would we necessarily need to go and use a board search firm to do that? No, everyone knows who those people are. It's really straightforward. The reason you'd use a board level search practice is because they know them inside out and they understand who those people are and what their situations are. So if you have speed against you, that's why you'd use a board level search firm. Exec committee level search firms and probably N-1 below that, that is where you would use your Shrek firms. I wouldn't necessarily go to a Shrek firm unless it was exec committee, or it was somebody in a deep specialism, say supply chain, procurement, economics, chief economists. Those type of areas have got that. Sometimes they're very strong. CFO practices are generally very good. Interestingly, although you have a CFO practice in these lead search firms, not all of them have a HR or a CHRO practice. That's only just evolved more recently. And that probably tells you that HR has only really just got a seat at the top table. Outside of those, so who do you use for your Exco and N-1 if you don't use a Shrek firm? Well, there's a plethora of challengers. So you could look at an Odgers as a challenger, you could look at a Walton Bay. The interesting thing about the challengers is they've all come from the Shrek firms. And they've got a little bit stifled by the way that those Shrek firms operate. And they think, well, we're going to act. I always think about it in Bill, but that's kind of showing my age a little bit. But in terms of the environment they want to operate in, they want to earn that type of money, so they create their own challenges. Some of them are very good. Below that, then, below challengers, you've got your boutiques, and everyone knows your boutiques. They're ones that not always do search work. Some of them are more contingent and they position themselves as search. But there are true boutiques out there. There are 3 or 4 people that, quite honestly, the output is better than Shrek because they don't take on as much work. They're really about delivery, and they're probably happy doing 10 searches a year, quite honestly, because it's worth it. Difficult to find the good ones, and you do have to kiss a few frogs, but well worth building up a network of good boutiques to support you in the various specialisms. And then you have contingent retained. So those are your contingent guys that you know and trust, know your business, but you don't want to pay a retainer, and they'll kind of do it on the great if you give it to me exclusively. But in essence, it's just contingent. And contingent, in my eyes, a lot of it, certainly at this level, you should be able to do direct. You should use those for search firms. So what are the other options? Right route to market. Interesting, we've just partnered with a technology platform to automate the referral process. So rather than your leadership having to phone around and going, great, who do you know, who do you know, who do you know? Actually, there's a digital platform that does that for us. Now, you could probably do that yourself if you could actually build it. But the beauty of it is it's just an easier way. Referrals, we all know statistically, are the best way to find these people. And in terms of de-risking, when you're asking these senior people for who they think can do the job, they know that it's their reputation as well on the line. So it's a really strong route to do that. We just need to find a better way, and maybe this digital online platform is the way of doing it. Alumni, imagine lots of you have an alumni program. How many of you got an executive alumni program? Executive alumni, now bearing in mind, and we don't have one yet, it's one of the things we're looking at, is because those execs that leave your business and leave with all that information and then go out into the market and go and join another large corporate, and you lose touch with them. You don't give them any platform to stay in touch with you, to be brand advocates for you, their network that they can reach out to. I would argue there is more value in an exec alumni than there is potentially in just an ordinary alumni. But it does need to be separate, because if you're talking about your old CEOs and your old CFOs, alongside exec search, there is that white glove, velvet glove type service that they would expect. Rather than even going to a search firm, actually, if you're strategically aligned and you have enough time to go out and map the market, mapping in insight firms. So effectively, they do what a research function does within a search firm. The difference is you own all of that data. So you might pay an upfront cost of, say, 20k for mapping of 10 to 12 businesses. You can make as many hires off of that as you please. And that's already a 50k saving on going to a search firm for someone at that level. So that's your Wilby Strattons, your Fortune Hills, Armstrong Cravens. Those businesses used to sell to search firms. They now come straight to end user. So right route to market, and I think part of where our expertise comes in advising the business, is when they sit down and go, we need to find a new chief procurement officer. Can we go and speak to Russell Reynolds? That's where we sit down and go, well, actually, I think you'll find that Lucy at Odgers is slightly better in that space. So I know that's a challenger firm, but even before we do that, maybe we should go and make sure that we understand what our role looks like. And that's what mapping and insight does. Another prime example is some of the newer roles, the data protection officer. Well, great. How does that look and where does it sit in organisations? Rather than you just creating a role and putting it through your OD, well, wouldn't you want to know what everyone else is doing? Not to say that that's right, but wouldn't you want to know, at least from a knowledge point of view, to understand exactly, are they putting it under legal? Are they putting it under compliance? Does it report somewhere else entirely? What's their remit? What's their salary? What's their benchmarking? Have we completely misaligned this? There was an instance where we acquired EE and we took on credit risk for the first time. And credit risk comes with criminal sanctions. So actually our leadership can go to jail, and they wanted to put a 60k person in to look after it. And it wasn't until I said, you realise you can go to jail, that they decided that it was probably an executive role. Yeah, it's an executive role. So that type of thing, again, I think that's where we add value. I think we can sit in there and go, actually, we don't need to run to Russell Reynolds. They have some brilliant people. All the search firms have brilliant people. That's why you pay the fee. But it's not always the right route to market. Last one I put on there, user experience. People always talk about the candidate experience. I mentioned earlier about facilitation. Part of the in-house exec search role, it's not just about going on LinkedIn, identifying, it's not just helping get some soft referencing on somebody so we can de-risk the hire. I think actually there's something in there that says the candidates need to, regardless of the outcome, the candidate needs to leave feeling brilliant, as though it's an excellent opportunity, and should the chance arise again, I'd definitely go for it.